While the world has been busy arguing over Canada's $19 billion F-35 deal, something far more interesting happened almost unnoticed. Quietly, without press conferences, without headlines. Canada signed a separate agreement with Sweden for 88 Saab Gripen fighter jets. And, that silence matters more than the announcement itself. Because this wasn't a backup plan. This wasn't Canada hedging its bets. This was a deliberate move. Think of it like this. Everyone is watching the front door, where the spotlight is bright and loud. But the real decision was made through the side door. Calm, intentional, and strategic. And when countries make decisions like that, it usually means something big is changing. On the surface, it looks like a fighter jet story, but it's not. This is a sovereignty story. Canada isn't just buying aircraft. It's quietly questioning a system that has existed since the Cold War. A system where smaller allies depend on superpowers for protection, technology, and permission. For decades, Canada played its role perfectly. Reliable, predictable, aligned. But this deal suggests that role is no longer enough. This move challenges three things at once. First, superpower influence, especially Washington's grip over allied defense systems. Second, the idea that Canada must always be a buyer, never a builder. And third, the assumption that sovereignty is just about borders, not control over technology. And here's the real question that should make you pause. If this deal is so important, why isn't it dominating the news cycle? Why Sweden? Why now? And why would Canada risk friction with its closest ally over fighter jets? Because this isn't about jets at all. It's about who holds the keys. And to understand why this moment matters, we need to rewind back to how Canada became so deeply tied into America's defense system in the first place. That's where the real story begins. To understand why the Gripen deal is such a shock, you have to understand the role Canada has played for most of the last 70 years. After World War II, the world split into blocks. The United States became the military and technological center of the Western Alliance, and Canada positioned itself right beside it. Not as a rival, not as an independent builder, but as a trusted junior partner. That meant buying American planes, American systems, American doctrines. Over time, Canada's Air Force became deeply tied to United States defense companies like Lockheed Martin and Boeing. Procurement decisions weren't just about what Canada needed. They were about what fit into NATO priorities and American-led supply chains. This wasn't unusual. Many United States allies made the same trade-off: less independence in exchange for security and interoperability. And for decades, it worked. Canada didn't have to worry about developing its own fighter jets. The United States would handle that. Canada would plug in, train together, and follow the system. It was efficient, predictable, and politically safe. But there was a cost. Every time Canada bought American aircraft, it gave up a little more control. Control over software, control over upgrades, control over how, when, and where those planes could be used. These weren't dramatic losses. They were quiet, technical, and buried deep in contracts. But over time, they added up. Fast forward to today, and, well, something has clearly changed in Ottawa. Canadian defense officials aren't just asking which jet is best. They're asking, what kind of country do we want to be in 30 years? According to defense reporting, Canada isn't simply delaying the F-35 decision. It's reassessing its entire defense procurement philosophy. That's a big deal. Governments don't do that unless they believe the old model no longer serves their interests. This is what strategic maturity looks like. Not breaking alliances, not rejecting NATO, but refusing to outsource national decision-making forever. And that's where the Gripen enters the picture, not as a plane, but as a tool. A tool that allows Canada to move from dependency to choice, from following rules to helping write them. But independence always comes with trade-offs. And the biggest question is whether the Gripen actually makes sense in the real world. That brings us to the hard numbers: costs, readiness, and control. At some point, every big defense decision stops being about politics and starts being about math. The first problem with the F-35 is cost, and not just the sticker price. Canada's deal is often quoted at around $19 billion, but that number only covers the beginning. Over a fighter jet's 30 to 40-year lifespan, the real cost comes from maintenance, upgrades, spare parts, software updates, and training. That's where the F-35 becomes extremely expensive. Think of it like buying a luxury car that only one company in the world is allowed to repair. And, well, they set the prices. You don't just pay once, you pay forever. Then there's readiness. Reports consistently show the F-35's mission readiness hovering between 30 and 50%. That means on any given day, only about half the fleet is actually ready to fly. For a country with vast territory and limited aircraft numbers, that's a serious problem. You don't need the most advanced jet on paper if it spends more time on the ground than in the air. Now comes the most important issue: control. When Canada buys the F-35, it does not fully control the aircraft. The software is locked. Weapon integration requires U.S. approval. Certain mission profiles require American authorization. Even data flows through U.S.-controlled systems. This isn't a conspiracy. It's how the program was designed. Defense experts call this structured dependency. The Gripen offers a completely different model. With the Gripen, Canada controls the software. Canada decides which weapons to integrate: European, American, or domestic. Canada can upgrade avionics without asking permission from another capital. That's not symbolism. That's operational freedom. Now, to be clear, the Gripen is not the fastest jet. It's not the stealthiest. And it's not the cheapest in every category. But it was designed with a different philosophy: maximum capability with minimum dependence. It's like choosing a rugged, reliable truck over a hypercar. One looks impressive, the other actually gets the job done. Every day, in bad conditions, without calling headquarters for approval. For Canada, that trade-off matters. Because honestly, real security isn't just about having powerful tools. It's about being able to use them when it matters most. And that brings us to geography. Because Canada's battlefield isn't a desert or a dense European network of air bases. It's the Arctic. Canada's biggest defense challenge isn't another country's air force. It's distance, cold, and emptiness. Canada owns the largest Arctic territory on Earth. Huge stretches of land with almost no infrastructure. Temperatures that drop to minus 40 degrees Celsius. Short, rough runways carved into ice, gravel, or remote airstrips. And when something goes wrong up there, help is not minutes away, it's hours, sometimes days. This is where theory crashes into reality. The F-35 was designed for modern, centralized warfare. Large bases, long, well-maintained runways, dozens of technicians, complex logistics chains. It performs best when everything around it works perfectly. But the Arctic doesn't care about perfect conditions. The Gripen was designed for the opposite scenario. According to Saab's technical data, the Gripen can take off and land on runways as short as 800 meters, even when they're covered in snow and ice. It can operate from dispersed locations with a ground crew of just 6 technicians and 1 refueling truck. Maintenance between flights can be done in under an hour. That's not marketing. Sweden has been proving this concept for over 30 years. Swedish Gripens regularly operate from highways converted into emergency runways. Their entire defense doctrine assumes that main air bases will be destroyed early in a conflict. So aircraft must survive by spreading out, moving constantly, and staying operational with minimal support. Canada faces the same reality in the Arctic. If a jet needs a massive base, complex diagnostics, and constant software authorization, it becomes a liability in remote regions. But a jet that can land, refuel, rearm, and take off again quickly becomes a force multiplier. This is the difference between a showpiece weapon and a working tool. For Arctic patrols, sovereignty missions, and rapid response across vast distances, reliability matters more than theoretical superiority. A jet in the hangar doesn't defend airspace. A jet that can fly every day does. And once you accept that reality, another question naturally follows. If Canada is choosing aircraft designed for independence, what happens to Canada's own industrial capacity? Because, jets don't just defend a country, they shape its economy. This is where the Gripen deal, well, it stops being a military story and becomes an economic turning point. For decades, Canada has been a customer in the global defense market. It bought advanced systems, but the real value, engineering, manufacturing, and intellectual property, stayed somewhere else. The Gripen deal, though, breaks that pattern. Saab isn't just selling aircraft to Canada. It's offering full technology transfer. That means final assembly inside Canada, maintenance handled by Canadian engineers, upgrades developed by Canadian companies. Instead of sending money abroad and waiting for parts and permission, Canada rebuilds its own capability. And then there's the detail that really changes everything. Rolls-Royce has committed to manufacturing Gripen engines in Canada. Facilities in Montreal and Winnipeg will be upgraded to build next-generation jet engines. That's not assembly work. That's high-end aerospace manufacturing, the kind that trains engineers, creates supplier networks, and spins off civilian technology for decades. Economic analysts estimate this could create around 15,000 direct and indirect jobs over the next 10 years. These aren't temporary construction jobs. They're long-term, high-skill positions that anchor an entire industrial ecosystem. To understand why this matters so deeply in Canada, you have to look backward. In 1959, Canada canceled the Avro Aero, one of the most advanced fighter jets in the world at the time, fully designed and built domestically. Overnight, 14,000 engineers and skilled workers lost their jobs. Canada's aerospace industry collapsed almost instantly. Many of those engineers moved to the United States and later helped build NASA's space program. Canada didn't just lose a plane, it lost confidence. That decision left a scar in the national memory, a sense that ambition had been traded for convenience. The Gripen deal is being viewed by many as a chance to correct that mistake, not by building everything from scratch, but by owning the process again. This is what technological sovereignty looks like in practice. Not isolation, not rejection of allies, but the ability to design, build, maintain, and improve critical systems at home. And Canada isn't making this decision blindly. It has watched other countries learn the hard way what happens when control is surrendered. One example stands out. If Canada wanted a preview of its future under the F-35 program, it didn't have to guess. It just had to look at Switzerland. In 2022, Switzerland signed a deal to buy F-35s. The original estimate was about 5 billion Swiss francs. By 2024, the cost had already passed 8 billion, and it was still rising. Operating costs came in 40 to 60% higher than projected. But money wasn't the biggest problem. Control was. Swiss defense officials discovered that certain missions could not be flown without U.S. approval. Data sharing was restricted. Technology exports were blocked. Even collaboration with non-U.S. approved partners became complicated. Switzerland owned the jets, but not the freedom to use them fully. This is what analysts call mortgaged sovereignty. You get advanced hardware today, but you pay for it with long-term dependence. Decisions that should be national, how to deploy aircraft, who to share data with, how to adapt systems, become subject to foreign consent. For a neutral country like Switzerland, that was a shock. For Canada, it was a warning. The Gripen model avoids this trap. Canada gets access to source code. It can integrate weapons from multiple suppliers. It can upgrade systems without waiting for authorization. That flexibility matters in a world where alliances shift and threats don't come with advance notice. This isn't about distrusting allies. It's about resilience. Canada is looking at a future with more uncertainty. greater Arctic competition, new shipping routes, increased military presence from multiple powers. In that environment, dependence becomes a vulnerability. By learning from Switzerland's experience, Canada is choosing a path that prioritizes freedom of action over prestige, capability over branding, long-term stability over short-term political comfort. But this choice doesn't mean Canada is walking away from alliances. In fact, it's doing the opposite, reshaping them. Because the Gripen deal isn't just about Sweden, it's about an entirely new network of partners. At first glance, choosing the Gripen might look like Canada stepping away from the United States, but that's not what's happening. Canada isn't abandoning NATO. It's broadening its options. Instead of relying almost entirely on a US-centered defense model, Canada is quietly aligning with countries that face the same real-world problems it does. Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Denmark all share key traits with Canada. Vast territories, small populations, harsh climates, and the constant challenge of defending sovereignty against much larger powers. These countries don't design their militaries around global power projection. They design them around survival, efficiency, and independence. The Gripen deal is the foundation for a different kind of defense partnership, one based on technology sharing, joint training, and integrated supply chains rather than top-down dependency. Instead of one dominant supplier and many dependent buyers, this model spreads knowledge and capability across partners. That matters in the Arctic. As ice melts, new shipping routes are opening. Natural resources are becoming more accessible. Military activity is increasing. The Arctic is shifting from a frozen buffer zone into a strategic frontier. Countries that can operate reliably in extreme conditions and coordinate with others who understand those conditions will have the advantage. This Nordic-style defense philosophy is pragmatic. It values high readiness over flashy specifications, cooperation over hierarchy, systems that can function when communications fail and bases are threatened. For Canada, this represents a redefinition of independence, not isolation, not neutrality, but choice. By diversifying its defense relationships, Canada reduces the risk of being locked into a single system, a single supplier, or a single political direction. That flexibility is power in a world where alliances are no longer guaranteed to stay static. And this brings the story full circle. Because once a country chooses autonomy in how it defends itself, it also chooses responsibility for its future. So the real question now isn't what Canada bought. It's what Canada is becoming. When you step back and look at the full picture, one thing becomes clear. The Gripen deal was never about fighter jets. It was about sovereignty. Canada didn't just choose a different aircraft. It chose a different future. One where economic security and national security are tightly linked, where technology is controlled rather than rented, and where alliances are built on equality instead of dependence. This decision revives an industrial capacity that was lost decades ago. It gives Canada the ability to patrol and protect its Arctic territory with tools designed for reality, not theory. And it signals to the world that independence in the modern age isn't declared with speeches. It's built through control of systems, software, and skills. But the story isn't finished. 3 questions remain open. First, how will NATO react as Canada exercises more independence? Will interoperability truly suffer? Or has that argument been used for too long to justify dependency? Second, can Canada sustain this industrial momentum? History shows how quickly capability can disappear when political pressure or short-term thinking takes over. And third, in an Arctic that is becoming more crowded and contested, does practical, reliable power matter more than cutting-edge technology on paper? These questions don't just define Canada's defense policy. They define the kind of country Canada wants to be in a more uncertain world. If you found this breakdown useful, consider liking the video. It helps more people see stories like this. And subscribe if you want deeper analysis on the decisions shaping global power behind the scenes. Because the most important changes don't always happen loudly. Sometimes they happen quietly, until the world realizes everything has shifted.